So, sit back and enjoy learning about today's lesson, the build-up to and the start of the major events of the arms race and the space race. Let's kick off our timetable going back 65 years to the 1950s. Then, as now, America was the most powerful nation on Earth. Then, as now, it was the richest country. A decade before, USA had won the Second World War. We had emerged from the Great Depression with the healthiest economy on the planet. We had the strongest military, especially now with the game-changing invention of the atomic bomb as of July 1945. For 4 years, America was the only nuclear superpower nation on Earth. Now, we knew that the Soviet Union was better than us in certain ways. Espionage was one. Their spies were better. That's how the USSR invented their first atomic bomb in 1949, after all, through stealing our secrets of the Manhattan Project. Just like that, now there were 2 nuclear superpowers. The USSR was also better at fomenting revolutions and training communists to spread totalitarian regimes to other nations. The same year as the Soviet Union's first atomic bomb, which is 1949, China exploded in a bloodbath of revolution. I don't mean literally exploded. I mean the Communist Party and the Communist Army took control. Headed by this man, Mao Zedong, a ruthless dictator, the Chinese Communist Party and army drove out the American-friendly but corrupt nationalist government headed by Chiang Kai-shek from China and proceeded to make the most populous nation on earth a communist one. That's when China's flag went from this one to the one that you now associate with China today. Most American middle schoolers don't know about Mao Zedong at all, but we should. And we definitely would if we were Chinese. In fact, Chinese school children have his face plastered all over China, godlike on so many of China's most venerated public places, like Tiananmen Square in the Forbidden City, or in most Chinese public classrooms. But Chinese school children aren't taught how many deaths that their venerated founder of communism in China was responsible for. Even after 1949, when so many Chinese were murdered for their loyalties to the old government, Mao set in motion policies that wiped out whole sections of the population to advance his communist agenda. They were called the Cultural Revolution or the Great Leap Forward, but really they were merciless practices that stole food from peasants, that drafted unwilling citizens into service, and executed many critics or undesirables. In 4 years, from 1958 to 1962, for example, Mao's unrelenting orders resulted ultimately in the deaths of something like 45 million Chinese. Mao published a red book that all Chinese citizens were supposed to have, that they were supposed to read, that they were supposed to live by. It was called Quotations of Chairman Mao. It was required reading in every Chinese public institution. And this is what we call a personality cult, when a human being takes on the likeness of a deity or someone to be worshipped. The current state of North Korea, it still carries on this tradition. Have you ever asked yourself which person in the history of the world has mass murdered more people? You'd be surprised by the answer. Most Americans would guess Adolf Hitler. And, sure, he has the most recognizable face, definitely the most recognizable mustache, but he is not the biggest killer. Some would guess Joseph Stalin. And another good guess, he comes ultimately in second place. His mustache is also recognizable. But the answer is Mao. Mao Zedong, Chairman Mao, by a long shot. He became so powerful that quickly he let it be known that he was not willing to take orders from USSR's Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin anymore, and he created a new kind of communism in China. America had to watch in horror at the rising red China flag. But it got worse. That next year, 1950, after China's revolution, Americans saw the communist invasion of North Korea into South Korea, sparking the Korean War, where Americans and the United Nations felt compelled to send our soldiers to war against the North Korean communists and ultimately against the Chinese. And it wasn't just revolutions and warfare that worried us. By 1950, same year as the Korean War's beginning, the Red Scare, the fear of communist spies among us, began to take center stage. Our nuclear secrets were stolen. Klaus Fuchs, a British scientist, was sentenced to 14 years in prison when we catch him spying on us for the Soviets. The government worker Alger Hiss, he goes to jail believed to be a communist infiltrator. And McCarthyism, it was on the rise as the House of Un-American Activities Committee set up hearings looking for traitors in the entertainment world, the scientific, the political, the military, the business world. The fear that the Soviets would overtake us worried us, to say the least. And the fears didn't stop there. As the Korean War goes from bad to worse, by 1951, General Douglas MacArthur recommends using the atomic bomb against the Chinese. President Truman fires him. The Rosenbergs are accused of being traitors and Soviet spies. They are executed 2 years later in 1953. The year before, 1952, there were now 3 nuclear powers, as Winston Churchill of Great Britain announces that they have developed their own atomic weapon. So the question is, can America maintain its military edge in this arms race? We think so, especially because of this. On November 1st, 1952, America tests out the world's first thermonuclear weapon, what we call the hydrogen bomb, on an atoll in the Marshall Islands. The new weapon creates a 25 square mile fireball that vaporizes an island. It also blows a hole in the ocean floor so big it could have swallowed up half of the island of Manhattan. Welcome to the new phase of the Cold War. This gives us the edge we are hoping for. In terms of kilotons, the H-bomb is something like 500 times more powerful than the atomic bomb blasts on Hiroshima or Nagasaki. Hard to believe, but this advantage doesn't last for long. The Soviet Union tests out their own hydrogen bomb just 3 years later in 1955. No matter what we do, it seems like the USSR is close behind in this technological war for supremacy. And although we are ahead, it still leads many Americans to worry in this time of nuclear fears. But we also consider this to be a time of promise and hope. I mean, after all, America is the land of opportunity and invention, of creativity. The 1950s saw the advent of Disney movies like Dumbo and Cinderella. DNA is discovered, and rock and roll is born. In 1953, America saw the invention of penicillin to cure polio and other diseases. 1953, TV broadcasting began in color for the first time. In 1954, Harvard doctors conduct the world's first successful kidney transplant. And by 1955, America releases the very first home microwave oven. At first, they are a bit pricey, $1,300, so sales were a little slow. By 1956, America has produced the very first videotape recorder and the first computer, hard disk. And our allies across the pond in Britain, they invent, believe it or not, the first hovercraft. So this is a new age of discovery when America and our allies are light years ahead of the Soviet Union, whose totalitarian regime discourages invention and thinking for themselves, right? Or at least that's what we tell ourselves. We're about to get a very rude awakening. On October 4th, 1957, something happens that sends fears down every American's spine. Its appearance in the night sky over America drew people out of their homes to stare at it in whispered fear. Now, I will share with you what it looks like. Viewer discretion is advised. This is Sputnik. What is a Sputnik? It's a Russian word that means traveling companion. It's a satellite sent up by the Soviet Union into space. Who would have thought that this 3-foot wide ball of shiny metal that looks more like a kid's science project would have terrified the most powerful nation on Earth? It was the fact that no Americans knew what it was capable of. Was it sending signals back to the Soviet Union as it sped across the American atmosphere? What if it was taking pictures of American bases, targets, or our nation's capital? Worst of all, what if on board Sputnik there was a detonation device, even a nuclear weapon ready to wipe out any American city at the touch of a Soviet button? But what Sputnik carried wasn't really the concern. It was what Sputnik represented. The Soviet Union had not stolen this technology from America. They had created it on their own and launched it into space. And America had nothing like it. It was like looking up at the satellite and seeing how inferior, how outdated we had become. Our scientists must be worse than our communist counterparts. Our schools must be failing compared to Soviet ones. Immediately, America reacted. A new wave of education reforms suddenly started focusing on teaching math and science above anything else. Clearly, America was not ready for space travel, and we needed to be. We could not launch a rocket into space as the Soviets had. By July of 1958, 9 months after Sputnik's successful orbit, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics was rebranded and transformed. Now it would be called NASA, which stands for the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. America pins its hopes on this organization to get us into space no matter what. Its first year, Congress is going to give it $89 million. Within 8 years, we are going to give it so much more than that until we are spending almost $6 billion, which will be 4.5% of America's entire budget. But will it be enough? And you will hear its story next time, as well as what happens in this race to space between two nuclear superpowers. It's an amazing story. Tune in to find out. We'll see you here tomorrow.